video is sponsored by Audrey. JK. It's not sponsored by anyone, she just has great ideas. Hi everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today for another video. Today I'm going to be bringing you the starter guide to biblical fiction. So, if you don't know, I'm obsessed with biblical fiction, and usually I talk about it a lot, and I get other people obsessed with it too. So what biblical fiction is, very short and paraphrased summary. Biblical fiction is historical fiction that takes place during Bible times, or times written about in the Bible. Sometimes it includes characters or characterizations of people in the Bible. Sometimes it's just normal characters, fictional characters, that observe something or an event recorded in the Bible. So I am going to be bringing to you the starter guide to biblical fiction, because now that you know what it is and you're all dying to read some, I'm going to do my top few recommended biblical fiction novels for people who've never gotten into biblical fiction before, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, now that I've gotten those books picked out, it's time to talk about them and tell you all why I think you need to read these books, why they're the best of biblical fiction, or why I would recommend them to someone who is just starting out in the genre and has not yet discovered what it is they like about biblical fiction. So the first book that I'm going to recommend that you try if you've never heard of biblical fiction before is The Pharaoh's Daughter by Miriam Andrews. Why? Because it was the first biblical fiction novel that I ever read, and it is what got me obsessed with biblical fiction when I didn't know biblical fiction was even a thing. So The Pharaoh's Daughter is the story of the woman who pulled baby Moses from the Nile and raised him as the Prince of Egypt until everyone found out who he really was and he ran off into the desert and blah blah blah, parted the Red Sea years later and effectively saved the people of Israel. I have always been obsessed with the Prince of Egypt movie ever since I was a kid. Like, I listen to the soundtrack every single day, so don't judge me. DreamWorks is awesome, so is Disney, but DreamWorks is underappreciated, at least early DreamWorks. I'm not really like into new DreamWorks. Disney won me back. Not that Disney ever lost me. So when I saw this book was a thing, I was like, yes, I'm down, sign me up, I'm buying it. And it was the first biblical fiction novel I ever read, one of the first Christian fiction novels I ever read, and the first book by Miriam Andrews I ever read. And if you're not into this story idea, she has tons of other books that are all amazing. My favorite part about her books is the research she does and how everything is always so well researched and like just amazing in general. I would highly recommend this book. It's exciting, it's interesting, it really has just a little bit of everything, and it gives you a good idea of what biblical fiction is like. And if you do read this book, make sure you go ahead and check out the sequel, which is Miriam, which I think is even better than this one. And Miriam is, of course, the story of Moses' sister. Also great novel, also great book. These are both fantastic. Just read them all. Just read all of her books because they're well researched. They have a lot of wit in them. For what they are, especially Miriam. So if you think this one's a little bit dry, or maybe it's just more history and more drama than what you're looking for, you should also read Miriam. They both kind of work as standalones, but I recommend you read them together. But of course you don't have to. But Miriam is hilarious. It had me rolling on the floor laughing because Miriam is just the definition of what I want to be when I'm older. So there you go. The next book I'm going to recommend to you guys, if you have never read biblical fiction before, is Counted with the Stars by Colin Cosette. Oh my gosh, I'm beaming just thinking about this book. So like I was saying, how some books in the biblical fiction genre take characters or characterizations of people we know in the Bible and write about them. You know, like books like Jill Eileen Smith's Wives of King David series, we know they exist, and she just takes what we know about them and writes a novel into it. Colin Cosette tends to take characters and she makes up characters of her own and places them in situations that we know happened in the Bible, but more from what they would look like from the perspective of just a normal person observing them, you know? It's like historical fiction at its finest. So to make a little bit more sense of that, The Pharaoh's Daughter is about the Pharaoh's daughter from Exodus who raised Moses out of the Nile. Counted with the Stars is about a girl who just observes Moses and exits Egypt with the Israelites, but is not actually a character in the Bible or someone from the Bible, but just a fictional character who exists at the time of a biblical event. This book is amazing, and all of Colin Cosette's books are amazing. I'm so excited for her next one, which is coming out not soon enough. And this book is about a young Egyptian girl who basically gets kind of kicked out of her house and sold into slavery by her family because families were very dysfunctional back then, and chooses to flee out of Egypt with the Hebrews. And she learns about Hebrew culture, and she, encounters Moses and encounters all the miracles that God did with the manna and the water in the desert. And this is the first book in a whole series about like the Israelites wandering in the desert, but it's really good. And if you aren't necessarily into, reading about someone that we know existed in the Bible, this is good too. Classic example of historical fiction and biblical fiction in general. Her books are huge turn pagers. Every time I read one, I read it in like a day. So if you want to just pick up something and get through with it quickly so you can get a good taste of it, I don't recommend that you just breeze through because it's amazing. But if you want to read something quick and you want something that's going to really grab a hold of you and keep you on the edge of your seat, definitely recommend Counted with the Stars by Connelly Cosette and all of her other books because they all tie in together, and cameos and book characters from other series cameo and are mentioned in other series. So it's like biblical fiction goals. The next book I'm going to recommend to you is actually a collection of novellas. Most people have heard of this author and are already obsessed with this author, which is why I tend to throw this one at their faces when they want to know what biblical fiction is, because they're like, I didn't know that she wrote that. Yes, she did. This is A Lineage of Grace by Francine Rivers. It is a collection of 5 women whom God chose to serve in his plan for humanity. She also has another one. It's called Sons of Encouragement. It's the same principle, but just with men. But essentially, this is a novella collection about Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. It's very good. It's very insightful. And at the end of each novella, there's also a 6-part Bible study, which kind of helps you compare the actual biblical account to what she's, suggesting might have happened in the novellas. And it's very good. It's very well written. And for those people that are like, I don't understand why you would read biblical fiction. Well, personally, I read biblical fiction to help me understand the Bible more and to help me understand God's word and to gain a new perspective on it. And this book is the perfect example of that. I love how it includes Bible studies and questionnaires so that you can kind of really compare the scripture with the fiction, because a lot of times you read fiction and you just assume it's all fiction, but this helps you really draw those parallels from the Bible, and I really appreciate that. Also, it's Francine Rivers, and she's kind of queen. The next book I'm going to recommend is actually a pretty recent read for me, and it is Pearl in the Sand by Tessa Afshar. This book is amazing. It is a retelling of the story of Rahab, and to be honest, it's just a really well-written story, and that's why I recommend it, because the writing style is amazing in my opinion. And, I hear a lot of great things about this author, so I'm really surprised it took me such a long time to pick up something by her. But her books, or at least this one that I've read, I've got others that I just haven't read yet. This one is amazing. You should read it. Great example of a biblical fiction novel based on a person from the Bible and a fictional characterization of them. And this one really has a powerful theme of redemption, and it helps you really apply Old Testament stories to your life today. Because a lot of times we look at the Old Testament and we're like, well, it's not the New Testament, so does it really apply to me? Can it really teach me something? Yes, it can. This book is a great example of that, and how it, really just talks about redemption and how God has such a redemptive power in our lives. And the last 2 books I'm going to recommend are The Crimson Cord and Rachel by Jill Eileen Smith. They are kind of the same recommendation, so I'm just recommending Jill Eileen Smith in general, but these are 2 of the first books that I ever read by her, and they are, I believe, she's the next author I think I discovered after reading The Pharaoh's Daughter by Misu Andrews. I immediately jumped into books by Jill Eileen Smith because she was one of the only biblical fiction novels that my local bookstore at the time featured. So that's how I came across her, and she really helped me also kind of get addicted to the genre. Crimson Cord is another retelling of Rahab, and Rachel is the story of Rachel, sister of Leah. Rachel and Leah. Drama. I think particularly with this book, the stories in Genesis can kind of be a little bit confusing, and they're a little bit like, whoa, did that really happen? Particularly the Wives of the Patriarch series really kind of shed some light on those confusing stories, and like, how on earth could you ever let your sister marry the guy that you were engaged to, and this really just shines a light on that. It tells her story. Both of these do great jobs of telling her stories. There are some books of hers that I think are kind of a hit or miss for me. These two were my favorites, though, at the time when I read them, so that's why I'm recommending them to you now. Some of her books, I could take them or leave them, but the great thing is that all of her books, while they are a part of series technically, like the Wives of the Patriarchs and the Daughters of the Promised Land series, I think they can also be read as standalones, so you can kind of pick and choose which ones you want to read, and if one doesn't grab you, don't hesitate to try another one, because I think there's something in her books for everyone. You just have to find the right one. And I think I'm going to conclude with that thought in general, because even if you don't like any of these biblical fiction recommendations, or you just aren't a fan of these authors in particular, that's totally okay. I think that there's something in the Christian fiction genre for everyone, and there's definitely something in the biblical fiction novel genre for everyone. You just have to figure out what it is you like in a book, and eventually you will find that. And hopefully I will have found it for you so that you don't have to waste time reading books you don't like. You can just go off of my recommendation. I'm Jenna Van Mourik, an inspired writer and an inspirational fiction reader who reads, writes, and lives for Jesus. You can find me on Instagram at Jenna Van Mourik, where I post every single day pictures of books and what I'm doing with my life. You can also go ahead and go over to subscribe to my blog, where I post written reviews of the books I read as often as I read them, and that is at www.jennavanmourik.com. Thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to like it and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and if you've read any of these books, please tell me your thoughts about them in the description box below. I would love to discuss them with you. It could be some good food for thought for even myself. Of course, if you have recommendations of biblical fiction novels, also drop those, because I'm always looking for more. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!